You are listening to the podcast for learning the language of A Course in Miracles so you can understand the meaning, embody the message, and live the teachings as a way of life. Welcome to episode 11 of this podcast. I'm your host, Reverend Jennifer McSween, creator of this podcast and the Course in Miracles practice coach for taking those who are studying the course from inspiration to application. On this week's episode, I'm going to talk about the Holy Spirit in the language of A Course in Miracles. Now, the Holy Spirit is as central a theme in Christianity as it is in A Course in Miracles, particularly in the Western world, which is heavily influenced by Christian beliefs, the part of the world in which the Course came into being and where it is still studied and practiced the most. As a result, the Holy Spirit is one of the terms or themes or ideas that is greatly misunderstood by students of A Course in Miracles. Through the lens of Christianity, the Holy Spirit is believed to be God in action in the circumstances of our lives and in the world in different forms. For Christians, the Holy Spirit represents the actual helper, comforter, and redeemer that, according to Christian doctrine, Jesus told them God would send in his place after he ascended to heaven, after the crucifixion and the resurrection. And that is taken literally to be someone or something or some form of activity that would make our lives better, safer, and happier, or that leads to changes for the better in the world, that would save humanity in some way. And this leads to the perception of the Holy Spirit as being actively involved in our lives and in the world. So we think it's the Holy Spirit that gets us parking spaces, gets us out of difficult situations, and that will tell us what to do or where to go to get the things we want that we think will make us happy. Now, this is the perspective with which we all come to the Course. And it is this perspective that causes us to have difficulty understanding the Holy Spirit as it's talked about and taught in A Course in Miracles. We're taught very early and throughout the Course that the way to experience peace and healing is by turning to the Holy Spirit. But because we take this to mean asking the Holy Spirit to change circumstances or conditions or to tell us what to do, we then often get very confused and or even disappointed at times when we feel we have turned to the Holy Spirit, asked for guidance or a change in some condition or situation, and either hear nothing or see nothing, or no change occurs on a physical level. And this can lead us to doubt either our ability to get the Holy Spirit's or God's guidance, or our worthiness or deservedness to receive it, or even the credibility of what the Course is teaching. Because we are looking for evidence of the Holy Spirit in some form or some physical manifestation. Now, before I became a Course in Miracles student, I was convinced that I was among that very select group of people that I was equally convinced existed who did not have access to the Holy Spirit or to guidance. And I recall I wrote about this in an article for the Pathways of Light Miracles News quarterly newsletter back in the summer of 2005, I believe it was. And I talked about, because I too at the time came to the Course like everyone else, looking at it through the lens of Christianity and looking for evidence in some physical form. And my idea of connecting with and getting guidance from Holy Spirit was somewhere along the lines of either having sea-parting visions or hearing a voice or literally having someone ring my doorbell and hand me a message signed by God. Now, the funny thing is, I never stopped to question how I would know it was God's signature. But since I'd never had any of these experiences, I took it to mean that I was guidance challenged in some way. And this is what I wrote about, and because I remember sharing this bit of information with my Pathways of Light spiritual counseling course facilitator at the beginning of my training. And the uh, Pathways of Light Course in Miracles spiritual counselor training is literally training us to be sort of inner guidance counselors, where we learn to be led, be guided by Holy Spirit, to guide others to connect with the Holy Spirit, their own inner guidance within them. And so this is primarily about being guided and helping others to learn to connect with inner guidance. So since this was the basis of the training, and this course was based on the teachings of A Course in Miracles, I felt that this was very pertinent information for my, of course, facilitator to have. And as I wrote, I don't recall him directly challenging me on this thought. I do believe that he may have, it may have opened the door to discussion of the course's concept of specialness, but we came to laugh about it later on. And, for me, it was, gee, what a silly thought that was. Because by the end of my training, and because of the training actually, and becoming more aware of the metaphysical framework within which the course is written, I came to understand what the Holy Spirit really was and what it meant to turn to Holy Spirit in the language of the course. Because you see, in the language of the course, the Holy Spirit refers to the memory or awareness of the truth about God and our oneness with God that is in our mind. The course puts it this way. In a passage in chapter 5, it says, the Holy Spirit is simply a thought or presence in the mind that reminds. It reminds us of the other way, the peaceful, conflict-free alternative to the ego. And it is that reminder that allows us to look at our ego without guilt or fear or condemnation. That thought is always present in the mind, though we aren't always conscious or even aware of it, for that matter. And turning to the Holy Spirit means becoming aware of that thought and becoming willing to entertain and accept it as the truth instead of the ego's alternative. It is this thought, the memory of the truth of God, the Holy Spirit, that makes forgiveness and the peace and healing, the miracles that result, possible. And here's how this works. The Course's perspective of the Holy Spirit rests on the premise that our experience of being in an individual body, living in a world, can be likened to what happens in our nighttime dreams. That is, thoughts and ideas from our subconscious mind come up into the conscious mind in symbolic forms, and we experience them as if they are real and as if everything is really taking place. In our case, we are dreaming that we are separate individual bodies, something separate from God. That is, we're experiencing that tiny mad idea of separation as if it really happened, or as if it's really happening. And we're experiencing it in the symbolic form of seeing ourselves first as a body, surrounded by other separate bodies, in a separate world, consisting of infinite forms, all some reflection of the idea of separation. So the Holy Spirit in the language of the Course refers to the thought that says the separation never happened. And when we entertain this thought, it is experienced in the form of having peace of mind if we were worried or troubled about something, a feeling of safety or feeling safe or empowered if we were in a situation in which we had been feeling fearful or threatened. Or it may be finding yourself looking at someone with compassion and understanding whom you might have previously been judging and or condemning in some way. The goal of the Course is to help us awaken from the dream of separation. So the Holy Spirit, in the language of the Course, is reminding or telling us that there is another thought system, another way of looking at who we are and how to interpret everything that we see and that seems to take place in our lives and in the world, in every moment and in every situation. And by doing so, change the way we experience everything, every moment, every situation. The Course teaches that the Holy Spirit will respond to the slightest invitation. Now, the slightest invitation simply means our willingness to be open to the idea that there's another way of looking at who we are, where we are, and what is taking place in and as our lives and in the world. In other words, to be open to another way of looking at the world. The Holy Spirit's response is the change in the way you look at, think about, experience, and in turn respond to the situation, circumstance, or person that led you to turn to or invite the Holy Spirit in the first place. The Holy Spirit is the means by which we will awaken from the dream of separation. This is why it's such a central theme in the Course. We allow the Holy Spirit to help us awaken from the dream by entertaining the Holy Spirit's thought system instead of the ego's thought system. And the Holy Spirit's thought system, again, is simply the thought that says the separation never happened, what the Course refers to as the atonement. And we're taught in the Course that our sole responsibility is to accept the atonement for ourselves. Accepting the atonement for ourselves is simply accepting the idea that the separation never happened. And this is how we allow the Holy Spirit to help us awaken from the dream and literally be the helper, comforter, and redeemer in our lives and in the world that, according to Christian doctrine, Jesus promised, and what we are really being promised in the Course, that there is another way to look at the world and another way to experience the world as a safe, whole, loving, and complete experience, regardless of what is coming into your experience. So that's it for this week's topic, the Holy Spirit. Tune in next week and we'll be talking about Jesus in the language of A Course in Miracles. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the podcast for understanding the language of A Course in Miracles. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a review, subscribe so you don't miss another episode, and please invite your friends to listen. Have a great week and see you on the podcast next Wednesday.